headlight control, low beam, high beam. The horn. On this side is the spark control. Retarded at the top, advanced at the bottom. I run it about 9 o'clock, I guess you call that. A little bit above unless I'm going full speed. We're traveling about 45 miles an hour now. This is the hand throttle. You can call it the cruise control. You don't really have to touch this because the carburetor is set well. If you look down here, there's the gear shift. 3-speed transmission, 3 on the 4. E-brake in front of the transmission because it's an early at 28, 29. Over here, we have the carburetor control. If you pull it out, it's a choke. Depending how you twist it, that determines the needle, how much fuel can flow to the carburetor. And because this is an early 28 car, it's recessed under the fuel tank a lot more than the later one. You can see my wood dash here. It's just a little touch of an add-on. It's not original, but you can see the screws are Robertson head screws, and that's a Canadian thing. So if you look, almost all the screws in the cab here are all Robertson screws. Around the dash, there's some Phillips. They're just what was available, but. Four-wheel mechanical brakes, you might hear them here a little bit. A little bit of a ruckus. Oh no, it's pretty good. Really hear the straight cut gears in first and second. I double clutch all the time and there's minimal grinding. Fixtures here allow the windshield to open out. You need air conditioning, and there's a notch. If you see right here, about 1.5 inches up from the wheel, there's a notch. And if you rock them to that notch, there's a setup of sheet metal basically that aligns the air to flow down under this rail and blow into the foot compartment or under the cowl. And it really airs out this area, especially when the heat from the engine is getting you warm on a hot day. If you look at the radiator ornament, it's a coil. Under it's a little thermometer, they call it the thermocoil. And it's up there, looks like it's about 1/4 inch from the top right now, so we're at operating temperature. If I ever see it go up more than 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch, then I know it's getting hot. I'm gonna give her a minute to cool down. There are a few upgrades on this car. I bought it like this. The only thing I would change is the carburetor. It had a Zenith. It was a cast iron, an original Zenith. It was getting pretty leaky. And I replaced it with a Marble. Marble is a carburetor, a pot metal or an aluminum alloy sold by Sears and some other companies. Less adjustment. I've been more impressed with the Marble, but I haven't tinkered with the Zenith too much. I find the Marble gives more power and more fuel efficiency. I did a test using the trip odometer and a full fuel tank. In a 28-29 car, the fuel tank is about 10 gallons. In a 30-31 car, it's about 11 gallons because the cowl's lighter. But I've ended up getting about 18 to 20 miles per gallon. So 12 to 14 liters per 100 kilometers. I find that pretty reasonable for what it is. See, I have a rear view mirror here as well as both hinge mirrors, the rounds. I mentioned some upgrades. There's blinkers, LED blinkers. There's a box over here instead of being on the column. So there's a LED and I'm going to hit it and you'll hear it. A little bit annoying, but it makes sense, and the LEDs are nice and obvious how they're installed in the bumpers. I got into Model A's was about 2 or 3 years ago now. I was going south of Ottawa on a little road trip, and I took a wrong exit on the highway. I got to a little town, and there were seven or eight Model A's lined up on the side of the road. So wow, that's cool, I want to get into this. So I talked to the first guy, they were just about to head off. That was Coolant, and he was with Canada's capital A's, based out of Ottawa, Ford Model A Club. He ended up putting me into contact with another member named Steve. Steve had a whole bunch of parts. A lot of them have been into Model A's for almost their whole lives, and a ton of parts. And from Steve, I bought a frame, an engine, a transmission, rear end, rims, and tinkered with them. I had nothing to reference. I didn't have a full car. So a lot of time online talking to people. And I ended up, with the help of the club, applying for a grant or a scholarship called the Model A Youth Restoration Award, which is promoted by AFCA, the Model A Ford Club of America, as well as MARC, the Model A Restorers Club, to help promote people of the age 22 and under to get into the hobby, because there aren't young people really into this. And so it's run every 2 years, and I ended up winning it. It was, I think, around $2,500 US, which goes a long way. So with that money, I ended up getting my chassis complete, the engine running. We went through everything, and if you're interested in that, there's a couple brief videos I did for university on my channel you can look at. And with the whole COVID and everything, I wanted something to be able to do. The summer was looking rather bleak, so I said I'm going to make an investment and purchase a complete car. So I got the car with the help of the Model A Club of Ottawa, Canada's capital A's. You can look up their website. And Vic, he had this car for 10 to 12 years. He had it restored, and he treated it very well. And he took it all the way to Newfoundland. He took it to New York City with his wife, and he put 78,000 miles on it. So you can see where we are now. We're at almost 80. I've almost put 2,000 miles on it myself in the last couple months of owning it. I bought it, drove it home from Brockville where I bought it. I was having problems with idling, so I addressed the carburetors and it decided to leak all over the place. So I took the Zenith off and replaced it with a Marble, as I mentioned before. I'll go over the upgrades. So the simple things can be noticed, obviously, I guess you could say. There's the LED blinkers. There's a control box here. They're fixed to the bumper. They're quite bright. They're quite obvious, which for someone who's going to drive the car is highly recommended as far as I'm concerned. Otherwise, you're putting your hand out the window and doing different signals all the time. And when the weather's all over the place, you don't really want to be doing that. This car has the original single brake light, single tail light. You could ask your supplier, your distributor, what I heard at least, to install a second tail light, but this one just has the one. So Vic installed an LED light strip for the brakes in the rear window, which is very effective, especially for driving in the dark. The electric system is still 6-volt positive coil. It has a disconnect switch under the seat, so that there's no little drains that might happen when you haven't parked for a while. And instead of this is an early 28, so it had a big powerhouse generator on it, a wide, larger diameter cylinder than the standard generators you see. This one's been upgraded with a 6-volt alternator. You can really tell the difference when you're using the headlights. You turn it on and then you kick it a little bit, you give it some gas to let the generator kick in, and it's very obvious when they brighten up. everything's adjusted on this car. It's really, really nice to use. As I mentioned before, the brakes are still four-wheel mechanical brakes actuated by linkages. More subtle upgrades that you might not be able to see are this engine's rebuilt. It only has about 4,500 miles on it now. It had new Babbitt mains poured. It had insert bearing the rods, a ground camshaft. The valves are they're not the mushroom-shaped valves. So two-piece guides. All stainless steel in the valves. Valve seats have been replaced. The cam gear is still a fiber gear, it's not an aluminum gear. It has a high compression head with the Champion spark plugs, those thick ones. I'd like to run original plugs in it, but I haven't got a set of 4 yet. The rear end differential is a high-speed rear end. And these things between the high compression head and the high-speed rear end, there's a lot more power, very noticeable. And when I was talking to Adrian from Astra Work, we'll be putting a video on our discussion between younger guys and younger people into the Model A community. He was mentioning how he noticed a very big increase in engine braking capability. That's true, that is something I've always noticed, but I don't know any difference. I haven't driven a Model A other than this one. But the power is quite noticeable. And especially with the marble carburetor, I found that it had better pickup. So for fluids in this vehicle, I run regular gas. I run it very often. It's my daily driver in the summer when the weather's nice. So regular gas, I've never had a problem. There's no rubber anywhere in the fuel system except the seal for the gas cap, which I do notice gets a bit expanded sometimes, but no real problem there. I don't use Teflon in any of the fuel line fittings because the ethanol can have a hard time with that. Oil. This is age-old oil to me. So far in the transmission and the rear end, I run the 600W oil that's offered by any of the distributors. My other Model A, one that I'm building into a pickup truck, I believe it was 200 gear oil transmission, but I haven't been able to test that enough to determine if it's reasonable. For the engine I've run diesel oil. It's synthetic diesel oil. I believe it's 5W40. I'll correct that if it's not right. And it has a zinc in it, which is good for the Babbitt bearing. And I changed it with that oil. I don't have an oil filter on this engine, although with reference to Adrian's video on putting a partial flow oil filter, good time considering that. But I don't have an oil filter, and I change the oil about every 1,000 miles. That's with the diesel. For my coolant, this is a carryover from what Vic ran, what most of the guys in the club who drive a lot did. Distilled water with an additive that's used in racing called water wetter, and it improves the thermal conductivity. When the winter comes, I'll go to 50/50 ethylene glycol, normal engine coolant, and I'll see if there's any problems. I've never had a problem. I've driven this in 30 35, 40 with the Humidex weather. Never had a heating problem. It was always 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch in the thermo coil. Got some applause there. Really where I've had the most enjoyable time with the Model A is the back roads in the small rural communities. There's no traffic to stress yourself about trying to pass you in a sketchy position. You can just cruise. The roads are straight, not many bugs, weather's nice. Another thing I'll mention about this car is I have no windshield wiper. That is something probably to get into down the road. I don't know if I'll go to a Trico vacuum, or to be accurate, I should go with an electric. The early 28 would have an electric. But there's always that fine line, the line you want to balance between accuracy and drivability. Being that I already have the blinkers installed, the high-speed rear end, the head, I'll probably go for a vacuum wiper. But on this windshield I've used Rain X fluid. And so the water just beads up when it hits it. I try not to drive in the rain, but sometimes there's not much of a choice. The water beads up and phew, it just, because it's flat, the water just disappears basically. Never had a problem there. The visor also is very nice for the sun. It'll be right at this level just about, and you don't have to worry about it. The only downside with the visor and the elevation here, the level of the frame, is traffic lights. You have to kind of keep peeking at traffic lights. All in all, this car in the Model A community, I can't be happier with it. Most guys, I don't know, I'd say the average age range of people with this interest, maybe 65, 70, maybe even 75. So when they see young people taking an interest, they're more than willing to help you out. The generosity and willingness to help of the community has helped me limitlessly. Just with the knowledge, a lot of the guys did their own work, did their own machining. Very few shops who know about these vehicles anymore anyway. When I brought it to get a safety certificate in Ontario, Canada, the mechanic was impressed, he liked it, but it's kind of funny to watch him look at the different things and what he wasn't used to. There's nowhere to plug it into, no diagnostic tool. The diagnostic tool is your head, so I carry a box of sockets, a socket set, some of the basic wrenches I may need, carry a crank handle with a lug nut wrench on one side, the crank on the other side. And that's something I'll point out. With the high compression head, meaning that the engine is pretty new still with respect to a rebuild, it's quite difficult to hand crank it. But as long as your spark is set to the top, you can hand crank it quite easily. You flip the little guard there, the little dust guard, pull it up, and it'll fire normally on the first pull if it's nice weather. And compared to the other engine that I have, what would be the pickup truck, is non-refurb original Canadian engine. You can really, if you want to, it's loose compared to this one. It's kind of funny. battery in and out flow. This is the speedometer of this whole unit here. We have the trip odometer, the odometer, and the speedometer. It rotates like this. And then the key on and off. And you can tell also the difference between the early cars and the later ones. 28, 29 have what they call an oval speedometer. And 30, 31 have a round speedometer. There's also a light in your cluster lamp here. If you push it in, you can see my fuel. Spin it down, push it in, you can see my speedometer. Trip odometer is controlled by this pin here. You pull it out and you can adjust it. Well, that's about it for the overview of this car. If you want to see any more, leave comments of what you want to see, what you want to see me go into further depth about. But overall, for a pre-war car, for a vintage car, I couldn't suggest the Model A more. For the availability of parts, you can get almost everything. Brand new tires, 99 bucks a piece. And people are willing to help as well. There's always people online in person, and they're always more than keen to help or to help you find parts. And the other thing, for those in the audience who are hands-on, you can do everything on this yourself, absolutely everything. Thankfully, I haven't had to do it. They say it takes about 3 hours to do a full head gasket job on the side of the road. So, it's a very hands-on engine. You can see the insides if you look at the other videos as I mentioned before. But, with that, I say have a look at my other videos, have a look around the Model A community, and have a great day.